This is Art364 Part 11. We're in the second half of the 1700s, and this is called Neoclassicism. The first part of the 1700s is the Rococo period that we saw before, with Watteau and Fragonard. Here we have David, Jacques-Louis David, French artist. And the period called Neoclassicism because there's an awakening of interest in of classical antiquity, and it came about as a result of the rediscovery in about the early 1750s of Pompeii, the ruins of Pompeii. It was a city in 79 AD, a Roman city that was covered up because of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. At this time, in 1752, I believe it was discovered, and an archaeologist named Winkelmann, German, who is really the father of modern archaeology, was the one who discovered it, and in uncovering all the different things that they were able to see once they excavated it, he was able to find out a lot of things about the classical antiquity, about Roman life and art that they didn't know before. In all the previous periods, when there was a neoclassical type of periods where they wanted to had interest in classical antiquities, they didn't know that much. They had the ruins, Roman ruins around, and they had Roman writings and some Greek writings, but they didn't know that much. But Winkelmann was the one who was the first one to really study it, and he was the first to make the distinctions between Greek and Roman, and the different periods within the Greek civilization, and the different periods within the Roman civilization, so that it was much more academic. He was much more careful in digging up things and finding out just the sort of accurate information about the Roman period that they didn't know before. So there was this awakening of interest began with the rediscovery of Pompeii. Another thing that was happening at the same time that I mentioned before was that the Grand Tour, that is the students in Europe, the children of the upper class in European societies, whenever they went to universities at their last year, that they would take the Grand Tour and go around Europe and look at all the great sites, especially Rome, the ones in Italy, the Roman things like the Colosseum and the Pantheon and stuff like that, or they go to Venice and study and Canaletto, those paintings that were made for those tourists on the Grand Tour. Well, those people, after having experienced this, went back home, and they brought that interest in classical antiquity. So in the latter half of the 1700s, there's this reawakening, and people were starting to want that kind of art, or art that referenced that. And when they look back at classical antiquity, they were looking at it through this new information from this new archaeological finds, but also seeing through the eyes of the Renaissance and the Baroque, especially the Carraccis. All of those were sort of looking back in a way to classical antiquity, or sort of a distorted version of classical antiquity. So all those things mix together to make the kind of thing that was going on in the 1700s. This is a painting by Jacques-Louis David, and it's called The Oath of the Horatii. It's a picture done in the style of like, say, the Carraccis or the Renaissance style, but it also has much more accurate information in terms of what antiquity really looked like. That is, the costumes, the spears, the swords, the outfits, the armor, the kind of architecture. An attempt is made to make it look archaeological, archaeologically accurate to the period. So this is a story that occurred in it's a early Roman Republican story. And if we look at another one here, this is the Sabine women story. We've seen it a couple of times before. Poussin did a version of this. This is I'm just giving you this example of that interest in Neoclassicism. Here's the death of Socrates. Similar sort of thing. The figures are idealized. They are wearing togas. You know, they're made to look like as close as he can to a representation of what we have imagined in an ideal world. What these scenes looked like, and that's the characteristic of Neoclassicism. You know, it's about simplicity. You know, not excessive ornament, symmetry, geometry, architectural orders were important in architecture. As we'll see, they wanted to follow the kind of architectural orders that were laid down by Palladio, who got them from studying actual classical antiquity, and also idealism. So those are the ingredients that are going into this. There was also the French Revolution, 1789. And this is the same artist, Jacques-Louis David. He was commissioned to paint this painting. This is shortly after the Revolution, and this is it's called The Death of Marat, and it's a depiction of what the people at the time would have thought of as a martyr. That is, a man who was a revolutionary. His job was to sort of coordinate the revolutionaries. I mean, the people who were engaged in the aftermath of the revolution, this man named Marat was he was a journalist, and he stayed at home a lot because he had this skin condition that caused it. His therapy for it was he had to spend a lot of time in a bath, a medicated bath, and where he's depicted in his bath at home with his writing table or writing box there with a pen and a bottle of ink, and he's just been murdered. The woman who murdered him was somebody who he came in posing as somebody on his side in the different factions within this revolutionary group, and gave him a letter and made him think that she was on his side, and stabbed him with a knife, and the knife is there in the picture on the bottom here. The way this is depicted is not in the way that the Rococo style at all. It's a completely different style. It's one where it's about simplicity and balance and the kind of thing seen through the eyes of classicism. It has the reference to the Baroque. Here's an example: the pose of Christ within the Caravaggio's entombment. The figure here with the arm going down like this is in the cloth, and all this is similar to Marat here, and of course this pose, the pose from Caravaggio, he was quoting Michelangelo's Christ from the Pietà that we saw. So all of those, this has a long tradition. This pose. When you look at the composition, you have a repetition of rectangles. For example, you have this rectangle here. Basically very similar to the rectangle of the whole thing. You have there's the rectangle here, the same thing sort of on its side. The horizontal line, the rectangle of this right here. Repetition of rectangles, horizontal and vertical lines in a balanced, calm, harmonious composition. And since this is a death, it's this the quiet death. If we think of in the Baroque, the um, Zuberon, his martyr, the one where the one wearing the white robe, and he's standing and he makes a rectangle. In his head is actually in that same sort of angle. Um, all these things have gone together in ingredients to make this to glorify this what he thought of as a martyr. Since David himself was part of the revolution, he was within um, the sort of improvised government, I guess you could say it, where his job was sort of the as a painter, like a propagandist for the for that side, and so he saw that the woman on the other side as an enemy, and he wanted to promote Marat as being a hero or died a hero's death. Another way of looking at the scene, in contrast, a painting later of by someone else who took the opposite position. This is Marat in his bath, and this is the woman who killed him, and she is depicted as the hero, as the hero of France. There's a picture of France, which she's right there, and she's looking defiant and standing there after having stabbed him in the bath, and he looks kind of ridiculous in a bath with his in agony, and his arm is in disarray, and the chair overturned. So there's nothing heroic about him at all in this picture. So there are different ways to have looked at the same scene, but what we're looking at is how David depicted it, um, and how this is neoclassicism. This is this. When I think of neoclassicism, it's not really bringing back actual things from Greek and Rome. If you look at this, this is much closer. I mean, the shield, the helmet, the spear, all of these things, just the whole composition, or these sort of things. All of these look much more like an attempt um, to bring it back an accurate representation of Greece and Rome. But when you think of this is a much more emotional thing. The um, classicism is about rationality, I guess you say, and geometry and balance and symmetry, and this does have some of that to some extent, but it's also um, a romantic image in a sense, and Romanticism is going to be the opposite. We're going to look at a period called Romanticism, which it's actually contemporary with Neoclassicism, and you think of them as being opposite things. Romanticism is more about intuition and emotion, and it's a reaction against rationalism. But within Neoclassicism, because this isn't actual classicism, this isn't actual people behaving the way Greeks and Romans behaved, or looking at the world with the aesthetic of the Greeks and Romans. It is about people who were looking back, sort of longing in an emotional way to that era of balance and harmony. So you get something like this. This is a portrait done in the neoclassical style. It's a portrait of Pauline Bonaparte, who married a Borghese, so it's Pauline Borghese, who's the sister of Napoleon. She wanted, she's rich person in the early 1800s, and she wants to be depicted as Venus, and as if she were like cosplaying Venus, and she's lying on a couch, and it's depicted in marble in such a way as to be almost, well, just look at the detail of all the little bits of detail here, little decoration, the realism within this marble of this thing. This is the kind of realism that is that comes from like Bernini, like Bernini's uh, uh, Apollo and Daphne, which is also in Rome, as this is. And let's look at her face here. Look at her face. This is a classical face, or it's an attempt to like split the difference between what a portrait of what she actually looked like and the ideal classical face, and the representation of the hair and the pose and the little pinky sticking out, and just her the whole figure. A nude with this sort of drapery comes is a quotation from actual Greco-Roman sculpture. So all of these things are looking at the classical antiquity and taking what at least what these people wanted from that look, that classical look, but to be worn as a costume, rather than uh, it's like a surface aesthetic of that period, rather than uh, uh, genuinely being classical. Stunning piece. I mean, the quality of the sculpture is amazing. The pedestal that it's on is a continuation of this couch or a divan or whatever. But the illusionism of this swagging drapery here with tassels and things. This is still carved marble, and even the tassels, I believe, are carved, and they're gilt. All of this, to make it look special and elegant. Um, so that's French Neoclassicism. But at the same time, or coming up at this time, is another movement called Romanticism. Let's look at that. This is Francisco Goya, Spanish painter. He was the court painter for the monarch of Spain, Charles here, and this is Charles's family. And Goya is back here, right behind this canvas. And this is, we saw another court painter to the monarch of Spain from the previous centuries, Velázquez. And this is a quotation or a reference to the fact that Velázquez was also that. If you remember the painting Las Meninas, where Velázquez is there in the same position to a canvas that has turned his back to the viewer, and though that's the only aspect of that painting that is like this is the relationship of the painter and the fact that it's a portrait of the royal family. In Goya, when he was working for the royal family, he painted these pictures, and they're very much like Velázquez. I mean, the lots of splendor in the representation of all the costumes that the royal family is wearing. It looks like Velázquez, or it looks like the Venetian painters, like Titian and Paolo Veronese, uh, Tintoretto. So he was very skilled and to do this. But the 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 royal family were very inbred, and his attitude towards them was not one of admiration. In fact, he's made them look a little ridiculous. And if you let's look at their faces, the way he's depicted them, they look very unroyal, uh, and you can tell it's almost he's back there, um, scoffing at them. Uh, One art historian said that the caption to this painting ought to be the local grocer and his wife have won the lottery. Um, though they didn't seem to see it. They loved it. They thought he was great and thought that they were being made to look good, whereas in fact they kind of they look very strange. So that's Goya, as in his role as the court painter. But in uh, in 1808, the French, led by Napoleon, um, decided they wanted to conquer Spain, and they did. They through subterfuge and making the Spanish think that they were doing something else. They came in and just took the country, and that monarch there, Charles, he abdicated. So for a time, they were the rulers of Spain, and on May the 3rd, there was a bunch of the resistance fighters, the people who were against the Spanish people who were against the rule of the French. Tried to overthrow this new French government, and the French, on the morning of the 3rd of May, executed them. And this is a painting by Goya of that. What you see is the French army, here depicted as a line of executioners with guns shooting at this group of people, among whom is this one man wearing the white shirt and the yellow pants. There's what looks like a friar, and there's this other group of people. You can see the anguish in their body expressions, and also the ones who are already dead in a pile there. Now, if you were completely unaware of the history of art after this, and all you knew was the works from before this, this looks like it just comes out of nowhere. This is not like anything else that had ever been made. And it's called the first modernist painting. So because it's not derived from tradition at all. When you look at the other Goya we were just looking at, this is there's references to past pictures, and in the style, the way the painting is made, the poses, the composition of the room, having Goya back there is referencing a specific painting. But this is not like anything. None of the painters that we've looked at up to this point have depicted anything like this. When anything that has to do with war is much more glorified. You think of Velázquez and his Surrender at Breda, for example. It has a bunch of showing a war as a kind of a gentlemanly pursuit. But here we're looking at an act of war that is horrible. It's meant to show the inhumanity of man towards man. And there's also another aspect. Look at the people who are doing the killing. They're represented. You don't see their faces at all. They're just a line of faceless people in a regiment like this, and it's like they're a machine. Their hats look kind of like axe blades, and these look like axe handles, and they're executing as if a machine were killing, a faceless machine were doing all the killing, and it's happening at night. Lit by this lantern here, shining this light. So it's a kind of a I guess there's some bit of tenebrism from the Baroque here, but in the Baroque, this is not something that any of those artists would have done. And all just depicting a pile of dead bodies. That's a kind of a realism, I guess you could say, a quotation from Caravaggio, in that he did things that were real, painting things as they actually were. But he never did this. He never did anything like this to almost as if it were a protest of this sort of thing, or documenting a thing for the purpose of creating an emotion in the viewer to show the inhumanity of what's going on. So when I point out the fact that these are like a machine, this is also the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and there was a sense at the beginning that that the machines were kind of taking over, that the machines were inhumane, and there's a lot of darkness that comes from the notion of the beginning of factories and um, people working with machines and being like a big part of machines. Uh, and there's also the Enlightenment that was occurring, or that had occurred in the 1700s, which was about reason. And this is a Goya representing uh, the notion of the sleep of reason, or the word reason, produces monsters. So I guess this represents the Enlightenment and reason. But when you're asleep, it produces monsters, and the kind of monsters that it produces is this kind of monster. And that was a print. He also did a series of prints like this to drive home the point of the inhumanity of war and the horrors of it, which is a very modern thing. You know, it didn't. This sort of thing didn't exist before. The next artist is named Jericho, and he's uh, an academic painter. I haven't talked about the academy much, but in the 1600s, there's the academy that was begun by the Caraccis, which was an effort to bring back the Italian High Renaissance, and the way that those artists learned their trade was by studying the figure, studying composition, studying in an academic manner, studying how to be artists, and so the academies that were set up, the Carracci ones, and throughout the French Academy, the ones in Rome, all of them, you know, their effort was to teach students the trade of art by, you know, doing it in an academic way, a rational kind of painting where you learn the figure, you learn the muscles, the bones, and how to pose things and drapery and all those things that you learned in art school. But the academy by the 1800s had become very powerful. It was like the arbiter of what was art. And what we're going to see throughout the century, you know, beginning at the beginning of the century, it's very powerful. They make, or they, you know, people, all the artists make their art so as to get into the academy, and the academy, you know, has a committee that judges art, and they um, you know, they only let some small amount in, and it has to be very, you know, extremely high quality. Uh, you know, their criteria of judgment was you know, stringent, and it has to do with the highest order of things is history painting, big history paintings telling stories, and they have to do it, you know, heroically, and the kind of things that you know, we saw at the beginning. This is an academic painting, you know, and then this one, and this one, you know, they're all academic, and they're these are the highest order of things that that they would think as necessary for something to be a painting and to be accepted into society. When you got accepted into the academy, I mean, that would be your ticket to a career as an artist. Well, here's uh, this artist named Jericho, and he was one of these. He was trained, and he's here, you know, attempting to depict something that would be just what the Academy would want. It's a large picture. It's, I don't know. I think it's like 23 feet wide, and it's his history picture, and it's got lots and lots of figures, lots of classical quotations, the poses here, um, um, everything. You know, you could probably find um, everything about it is uh, uh, you know, comes from something else. It all looks like the sort of thing that would be perfect. But the story being told is not a classical story. This is a story of an event that had just occurred. It's called the Raft of the Medusa. The Medusa is the name of a French frigate in the Navy, and it was you know, it was stuck on a sandbar on off the coast of Africa. It got lost due to the, you know, incompetence of the people in charge. and they had to they put the people on rafts, and the people who got the boats, the rafts, the boats, just sort of like on the Titanic, the upper class, the crew, the captain and the crew got to escape, but the passengers had to ride on a makeshift raft, and it was there was like 100. Started out with I think it was 147 people, and they were at sea like 13 days. It was horrible. I think everybody died. Maybe I think it was 15 or so, or the only survivors. And there was cannibalism. There was lots of people died of exposure and hunger. There were um, they executed one another for mutiny. It was all sorts of horrible things occurred on this raft, and it was a huge scandal for um, uh, the French establishment. And so, since you think of the academy as the establishment, uh, making this picture that really uh, illustrates the failure of the establishment is not something that the academy was really liking, but also because it's not a historical subject in the sense of something from classical antiquity or from the Bible. Any of those things would have been accepted by the Academy. Something from long ago, a story that is sort of vetted by time. But this is a contemporary event, and that's not something that they were especially happy with. Uh, okay, when we look at this, um, this is not a neoclassical picture, though it has those ingredients. When you look at the figures, they are very accurately drawn figures, but they're not idealized. This is much more like the kind of realism that you have with Caravaggio in terms of the studies of figures. Like he did intensive studies of dead bodies to get the realism of this. Um, but if you look at all of these actions of people, they're much more designed to provoke an emotional reaction. There's a lot of uh, of motion and expression. It kind of looks like the figures in Michelangelo's Last Judgment. You go back and look at that. See just a knot of swirling bodies, I guess you could say. Um, what's going on here is that they're on the boat, and they've been on the boat for a long time, and um, they've seen a ship. There's the ship, tiny thing, 100 miles away, and they're trying to to get rescued, trying to signal the other ship. They are they did get rescued, but by accident. There had been no rescue party sent out. Just a passing boat happened to see them, and they got rescued that way. Extraordinary thing. It was a success, though. I mean, the public liked it, and he took it on the road, and he went to England with it. He would have these like almost like a circus, where you have the painting is presented in some way that people would pay to see it and line up, and he would tout it and give lectures about it. Um, so this is an example of Romanticism. It's about emotions. It's about intuition, and it's a reaction against um, the Enlightenment and rationalism, and it's also a reaction against the establishment. And even though it's using the tools of of uh, of academia, of academic art, it's also it's using them sort of to subvert. One of the friends of Jericho, who was actually one of the models of one of these figures, was named Eugene Delacroix, who's also a painter, who painted this. It's called Liberty Leading the People. This is a painting it references a historical event. It was also contemporary. It's something that happened in 1830. It was as a revolution after the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon and Napoleon's fall, 1812. Then there was a new government where they brought back the monarchy, and then there's a revolution against the monarchy again. and this is part of that revolution. Though it's a kind of an image that it's not so specific to that revolution as to any revolution. In fact, the spirit of 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 revolution rather than the specific event. But what you see here is a figure, a female figure, semi-nude, holding a French tricolor flag, holding a musket with a bayonet. This is uh, this is liberty. It's a allegory, or she is the symbol of liberty. It's not meant, I don't think, that she's actually there in the scene, but that she's representing that spirit of wanting the people wanting freedom against oppressors, and in this case, it would be the royalties that they're trying to overthrow. I believe they were unsuccessful, or at least they just got another monarch. But it's made up of the types of people rather than specific people or specific portraits of people. The student, the bourgeoisie, the workers, the boy, young and old, a diverse group of people who are all sort of can't take it anymore, and so they're uprising um, and just fighting against whatever tyranny that's oppressing them. Um, and it has the realism. Look at this figure, this dead figure here. Just the happenstance of the way it's posed. There's no idealism here. There's no nothing to make these look heroic at all. This looks similar to the kind of figure, the dead figures here. As I said, Delacroix knew Jericho, and you can look at this style. It's all polished and smooth. This is in an attempt to look just like an academic picture, whereas this, has that looks more like Rubens or the Venetians from the Renaissance. That kind of looser, more interest in color and surface texture. It's Notre Dame back there. Okay, so that's Romanticism. And then we have this picture. It's by a student of David named Ingres, Ingres. Looks like Ingres, Jean Auguste Dominique Ingres. And he was a neoclassical. He's classified as a neoclassical painter, and this has some characteristics of a neoclassical picture. But when you look at this, it's called the Grand Odalisque. Odalisque is like a harem girl, so it's the opportunity of representing a nude woman in the guise of classical antiquity, like that Pauline Borghese that we saw, or like a Venus or something like that. But because it's if you're going to paint such a thing, a nude female for academic purposes, putting it in the guise of a harem girl is a distortion of what that the reason for having nude figures in the first place. Remember, in classical antiquity, especially in Greece, the nudity was something that was a religious thing. That is, when you worship at the temple, the formal dress was nude, and nude was the ideal state. So that idealism of classical antiquity was about, there was a rationale for it. But here, it doesn't have the same rationale. This is simply just an opportunity to have a nude woman in a picture and sort of clothed in the sort of respectability of academia. But at the same time, looking at it through a romantic lens, even though it's a beautifully composed picture. Just look at this inverted arch. Here. It goes like this. This is just, it's a wonderful thing, and the repetition here, just using the formal elements of this picture are just dazzling. The textures, the colors are just beautiful things, and it's an extremely well executed picture. But when you think of in terms of the rules of the Academy, and you think of the accuracy and the idealism of a figure, look at say the spine here. There seems to be something wrong with it. People don't bend this way. She seemed to have more vertebrae than normally is required. And this arm kind of looks like rubber. It doesn't seem to be an accurate representation. And the way this leg is positioned here, it has the kind of distortion you think of as the Mannerists would have. I mean, but it's all distortions that are occurring for formal purposes, like to create this sort of U shape. So it's a strange combination of what's going on in this picture. It has this tremendous realism. Look at this. The ostrich, I don't know, I mean a peacock feather fan, a hookah here. Lots of beautiful things and gorgeous to look at. The looking, the whole idea of looking to the east, looking to like Persia for costumes is a kind of an example of Romanticism rather than Classicism. So we're using Neoclassicism as a kind of as the structure of the picture, whereas Romanticism is the essence of this picture. So that's French, sort of in between Romanticism and Neoclassicism. The next work we're looking at is English. We haven't had many English works. I think this is the first one. It's called the Haywain by John Constable. John Constable, when you look at him, he seems on the surface it seems kind of ordinary. This looks like a regular sort of landscape. It's green as clouds. There's a wagon called a Haywain in a river. It's crossing the river. It's being pulled by horses over there. There's people on it. There's a dog over here. It looks very picturesque and quaint. And if my grandmother had a reproduction of this in her living room. I mean, this is a very quiet and just a normal establishment sort of picture. What could possibly be modern about this? This was it's called classified as a romantic picture because if I've seen photographs of this house, I mean it still exists, and you can take a picture of what this looks like now and what it looked like then. What's going on in the picture is that the artist has romanticized, I guess, the landscape. I mean, during the Industrial Revolution, the landscape changed, and the world changed. It went from mostly a rural world to an urban world, and the people who lived in cities sort of longed for the days when people were out in nature and farms and this is sort of a looking back longingly towards an idyllic past rather than an actual representation of what the place looked like. It's a beautiful picture. I mean, it has that sort of Rubens or Van Dyck landscape look, feathery greens and just beautiful loose paintwork. But and he was an artist. They had their own academy in England, and he tried all his life to make pictures that they wanted, and they didn't get him. He was rejected most of the time when he tried to make pictures for the academy. But he had a kind of almost a a scientific investigation of the world when he was painted. And he was one of the first to actually go out into a landscape and paint on the spot. That's exactly what he was looking at. Now, this picture would not be painted on the spot. This is like 6 foot wide, and it would be ungainly to take this out into a landscape. But he made smaller works outside. He would take paint. This is before the advent of paint tubes. That didn't happen until 1830 something. And being able to put paint in tubes to go outside and paint wasn't practically possible in the years before that. There wasn't very many things that could contain paint, and it would be difficult to. You can't. Grinding paint is something you have to do in a studio, but John Constable, even before that, was able to. I think he would mix up paint and put them in mussel shells of some sort and cover them and take them out into a landscape and paint. And the kind of paintings that he would make out in a landscape are very different. Looking at this sort of thing, this looks completely modern. It doesn't look, when I first saw these, after having seen just the regular John Constables, I was surprised. This doesn't look like anything that was made, at this time in the early 1800s, the late 17 and early 1800s. These have a kind of a spontaneity that that you don't see until much later in the century, until we get to the Impressionists. And the Impressionists, one of the characteristics that they have is that they will go out into a landscape and paint, looking, getting a direct response to nature by looking at things and putting the paint on the canvas right there, which will be a new thing then. But here's somebody in just a pioneering that. And a lot of these, like this, are studies for those big, Hay-Wing type pictures, and they're done very loosely, and they're done to study the color and the relationships and of one shape to another, the color to one, and they all have that sort of spontaneous feel, the kind that you get when you look at something in nature and you have a response to it, and that response is directly um, put into the paint, and it has that feel to it, that energy that comes from that. He also studied clouds. I don't know anybody else before him, which just paint an entire picture, and he does a lot of them, of clouds. In fact, he was many of the clouds are meteorologically accurate. That is, he's actually studying the clouds as they really are, rather than making up clouds. When you look at clouds in other pictures, there's some clouds over there. It's kind of smoky. That's all I have here. But if you think of the kind of clouds in Baroque paintings and stuff, they're just made up. These are accurate clouds. In fact, he had a neighbor who was the meteorologist who invented the terms for names for clouds, like cumulus and nimbus and all those technical terms for clouds. It was named by one of his neighbors, so that they were studiers of nature. He also had a friend named Turner. This is Joseph Mallard William Turner, another Romantic painter who painted at the same time as Constable, but his were accepted by the Academy, even though when you look at them, they seem to be so far removed from what you would think the Academy wanted. But what Turner did, he has the loose brushstrokes. He has the beautiful attention to color, but the things that he painted were, in this case, this is called the burning of the Houses of Parliament, was a contemporary event. But one of the aspects of of Romanticism was uh, a response to nature. Being it's a reaction against the Enlightenment and rationalism, but uh, it was about emotion and individualism, and it's a glorification of, of the past and also of nature. Um, One of the things, when you think of one of the terms, a popular term at the time was uh, the sublime greatness that is sort of an upper level of greatness, the kind of things that inspire awe in a person. And this would be an example of painting awe. That is the experience you have, seeing a great conflagration like this, uh, House of Parliament, and this is the Thames River and the London Bridge, and this is Westminster Abbey's towers back there, and the Parliament, the British Parliament was out here, was on fire, and he witnessed it, and he made some sketches at the time, and he went back to the studio and painted this, and look how loose it is. It's um, it doesn't have that sharpness and polish that most academic pictures would have. It's just a a giant scream of color and form, and because he's painting fire and cloud and smoke and clouds and stuff mixing together, it's practically like if you take out a section of it, it's almost entirely abstract, and that's something that abstract pictures are not we're not going to see until in the 20th century. So uh, much of what's going on here with Constable and Turner are things that are like precursors to what's going to happen in the future. And we have one example of a German romantic. His name is Caspar David Friedrich. And this is the Abbey and the Oak Wood. Um, One of the aspects of Romanticism is an appreciation for darkness and terror and horror, and what we think of as the Gothic horror story, like Frankenstein and Dracula. The notion of a haunted house or medieval castle with darkness and shadows and monsters and vampires and all those things are sort of an invention of the late 1700s of what came to be called the Gothic horror story. And there was the appreciation of that feeling, that the feeling of creepiness, I guess. And this is an image of a ruin of an abbey at dusk, and in the wintertime where the trees don't have any leaves and they're all twisty and creepy looking. And there's a bunch of monks here who are going into the abbey as if it were still a church, but um, it's in ruins. It's just one wall there, and they're performing some sort of ceremony, perhaps dark, perhaps it's a funeral or something. But all of these things that are difficult to see in here, uh, we recognize as the kind of things that later are going to be immortalized in things like the movies, like Dracula and Frankenstein and all those little dark things that come out of um, this romantic period, this aspect of Romanticism. Here's another one like it, of the same abbey at night. Uh, Dark and creepy. Here's the same thing in the day, but still seen through romantic eyes. The ruins of something, that longing for the a romanticized past. Um, there were there were rich people who would uh, landscape the grounds around their manor, and they would put like on a little island in a lake, say, put a little building and make a building look um, like a neoclassical building, but they will make it in a ruined state, because the ruined state is much more evocative of that emotional, that longing or nostalgia uh, uh, that comes in that's a romantic thing. Um, if you look at a photograph of the actual building, uh, it's kind of hard to even imagine how's anyone going to look at this and see it with this sort of romance that the artist did. Uh, there's a huge difference here. So it's not like they're painting reality anyway. This is what the real thing looks like, and there's not anything particularly special or evocative that much about this. Uh, but they're seeing the world through a kind of an artificial lens. Okay, so that's Romanticism in Germany. Then we saw Romanticism in France and in England, and uh, and how that is sort of a and the Neoclassicism is like, it's like a cousin. It's not like an opposite, two sides of a coin thing. Romanticism and Neoclassicism. They're actually two aspects of the same thing.